You're killing me, Smalls. You're killing me, Smalls!
My name's Tom Sullivan. I worked for Controlled Demolition Incorporated, CDI, the top-rated explosive demolition firm in the world, owned by the Loiseau family during the years surrounding 9/11. And I worked for them as an explosives loader for 2.5 years. As an explosives loader, my job was to place explosives in the buildings to prepare them for demolition. I was licensed while in New York by the New York Fire Department to handle explosives. And I worked on major projects such as Seattle Kingdom, the Three River Stadium, Philadelphia Naval Hospital, and Keyspan gas holders in New York, among others. I currently live on the East Coast.
Isn't it true that anybody can implode a building straight down just by placing a bunch of explosives around?
There are many steps that you need to take. The first off is you have to weaken the building, and that's after a lot of studies have gone into how the building is built in the first place. To weaken the building, that means the staircase, all the staircases have to be cut at intervals. The firewalls have to be removed. The elevator shafts have to be cut, and the rails cut, as well as the cars themselves removed. And then you have to move to the support columns on the particular load floors, and those are cut by a torch for two reasons. First, to weaken them, and also to allow for charges to be placed onto the structure or onto the columns themselves. And that essentially reduces their strength by about 20%. And even with all of that work being done to weaken this building, it still remains safely standing, so we can continue to work in it. The story that just a few columns can cause a synchronized global collapse, an implosion, is, well, that's just nonsense. After the prepping work has been done, then it's time to load the building. And in the case of a steel frame building, that means we load them with RDX cutting charges, which are loaded with individual delays, sometimes as many as 2 to 3 different delays on a given floor. So you have to understand the work is complex and precise and requires years of experience. We were told by the NIST report that fire caused one column to fail, and from that point we had a global collapse of the building in a classic implosion. I don't see how this could actually happen in real life. When we load a building, we have to have all the support columns on a given load floor fail at the same time, within milliseconds of one another, and therefore the entire building comes down in a synchronized implosion. So I think this notion of a one column failure causing an entire building to implode in a synchronized fashion is just nonsense. Looking at the building, it wouldn't be a problem once you gained access to the elevator shafts. Then a team of loading experts would have access to all the core columns and beams. The rest could be accomplished at that point by just the right kind of explosives for the job at hand. The choices are many out there. Well, I've worked on buildings, steel frame buildings, where essentially you load only the bottom third of the building, and that causes the building to implode. Yes, we have loaded buildings in that fashion where just the core support columns are loaded, and we don't necessarily have to load the outside perimeter columns to have this building come down successfully. With steel frame buildings, you don't have to load all the floors to have a successful implosion. Only the bottom third of the building needs to be loaded to have a successful implosion. For instance, I worked on a building in Hartford, Connecticut, the CNG building, where we did just that. You wouldn't need miles and miles of det cord. You could have used wireless remote detonators, and they have been available for years. You need to only look at an action movie to see them in use, and of course the military has them as well. Contractors don't use them, on the other hand, because they're just too expensive. Well, you wouldn't have found steel casings to be left in the rubble. They haven't been used for years. What we use now is RDX copper-jacketed shape charges, and when they're initiated, there's nothing left of those charges. And in the case of thermite, well, thermite self-consuming cutting charges have been around since they first patented in 1984. So there would be nothing left in the debris pile except some residue of molten iron. Well, the key word here is controlled demolition, and I emphasize the word controlled. We use careful placement of the charges. They're always focused and precise, and we're just not talking about setting off a bomb here. Plus, the amount and type of explosives can pretty well take care of any collateral damage. With any implosion, you don't hear one massive boom sound. What you do hear is smaller explosions going off, which leads up to the implosion of the building. Mr. Sunder of NIST has said that you would, if this had been a controlled demolition, you would have heard a large, massive bomb going off, a big boom. He says what in reality happens with a controlled demolition is you hear a successive, progressive, smaller waves of smaller explosions going off, and that leads to the successful implosion of the building. In the case of thermite cutting charges, you would have heard far less noise, since they are worked by thermal heating, melting of the steel, rather than an explosive cutting as in RDX charges. Now, regarding the criticism that this couldn't have been a controlled demolition because the building apparently exhibited a bit of lean as it came down, well, in my experience, this isn't exactly precise. The buildings can lean a bit as they come down with any implosion. I knew from day one that this was a controlled event. And why I did that is because simply looking at Building 7, you have a sudden collapse of the building. It's fairly symmetrical as it comes down. There's the classic kink, which means that the center core fails first, and you can see that on the video, and the building falls near free fall. So I really honestly didn't believe this from day one, because this is the way buildings classically come down with a controlled demolition. I want to emphasize that I in no way represent CDI, and what I have to say is based solely on my own working experience and training while working for them. This NIST report is very suspect, because I would have expected in a classic implosion, as I've seen numerous times, is the core to fail. Essentially, what I'm saying is the core, I would expect the center of the building to start moving first. And then as the implosion progresses, then the sides come in, then the rest of the building is involved. So this idea that it's started on one side and all of a sudden the core starts moving at this, as this thing progresses is just doesn't make sense. What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it. So the idea that it started on one corner from one column off in the side, therefore the core was involved starting from that corner, just doesn't make sense. It's not how it works. Well, again, if you listen to the testimony of people on the ground, they're reporting exactly what I would have expected. I mean, I've been to all the implosions that when I was working at CDI. Again, as you point out, I photographed them. And what you hear is waves of explosions going off. Not one massive big boom, but you hear boom, 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 boom. Go back and listen to the tapes of the police officers and people on the ground, and the firemen as well. They're reporting exactly what I would expect. You're hearing boom, 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 boom as these different floors start to fail. So again, what I'm hearing from what people were there is exactly what I would have expected. You don't break glass. So collateral damage, windows breaking for blocks around, that kind of thing, it just doesn't happen if it's a controlled demolition.
morning. I saw the plane coming this way in a spot, goes factory directly to the building.
Was it the first plane or the second plane?
That was the first plane. The second plane, no second plane. It was a bomb. Bombed in the building, not second plane. That was a bomb.
But then there were other doors that were locked, so we were brought into another floor when there was another explosion, and they finally let us continue to go down.
What was happening around you? People screaming?
No, people were pretty calm. When we got down to 6th floor, there was like another shake or another explosion. Everyone started panicking, but...
Rick Sanchez has been there throughout this morning for us. Rick, tell us where you are and what the latest is.
I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it.
Joining me is Jack Kelly. Now, he is a foreign correspondent. He has some information about these attacks. Jack, what can you tell us happened first in New York?
Apparently what appears to happen was that at the same time two planes hit the building, that the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building. Is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is still unconfirmed, but that is what the FBI is going on at this point.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. There was another explosion which took place. According to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
Right now. You gotta get back from here.
I know that. You gotta get back. All right. Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now. All right.
Bomb in the building, start clearing out. Sorry, you said the bomb? What'd you say? Bomb in the building, start clearing out. Got it.
It just went ba-boom. It was like a bomb went off. And it was like holy hell coming down them stairs. And then when we finally got to the bottom, they were coming out on the mezzanine level there, and another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
Like, it sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions, 3 thuds, and turned around to see the building we just got out of. Antenna tip over and fall in on itself.
At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
We stuck on the stairs for a while. We finally got down to the lobby. Then we get to the lobby, there's this big explosion.
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion.
Then somebody said that they saw an airliner go into one of those towers. Then, I don't know, an hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that.
We've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
I did pass through a couple of parks and on some of the streets, and before, when I reported about an hour ago, there were people at their gas pumps who turned to look at the smoke that was coming from the city, folks stepping out of bodegas and stores to look. Now people are gathering in large groups. In fact, in one corner, I saw a group of people actually holding hands and praying. As I stand on the Manhattan Bridge, which is closed, it is open to pedestrian traffic. Some people are walking across, but there's just no way for them to, as I look at something else that I get,
I wonder what your thoughts are about how you further tighten the financial pressure on Iran in particular, if it also means economic pain for a lot of our allies.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. One of the problems
not specifically on this issue, just in general, that let's put it this way: money trumps peace sometimes. In other words, commercial interests are very powerful interests throughout the world. And part of the issue in convincing people to put sanctions on a specific country is to convince them that it's in the world's interest that they forego their own financial interest.
The French filmmakers, the Naudet brothers, were in New York City doing a documentary about the New York City firefighters. And this clip is the only known footage of the first plane hitting the first tower. Now, this video clip that we've just examined came again from the Naudet brothers documentary that was being filmed in the streets of New York City on the morning of September 11th. This documentary about the New York City firefighters was going to be assembled at a later date, and it was not televised. In fact, there was no live coverage at all of Flight 11 as it hit the North Tower. After all, it was a surprise attack. So if there was no live television coverage of the first plane hitting the first tower, how do we explain the following comment from George Walker Bush?
What was the first thing that went through your head when you heard that a plane crashed into the first?
Well, I was sitting in a schoolhouse in Florida. I'd gone down to tell my little brother what to do, and you can go ahead and sit down. Just kidding, Jeb. And it's the mother in me. Anyway, I was sitting there, and my chief of staff, well, first of all, when we walked in the classroom, I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error. I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error.
I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on.
I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on.
I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on.
I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on.
I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on.
There was no live coverage at all of Flight 11 as it hit the North Tower.
I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on.
There was no live coverage at all of Flight 11 as it hit the North Tower.
You recently seemed to muse aloud whether you had advanced knowledge of 9/11. Do you agree or disagree with the RNC that this kind of rhetoric borders on political hate speech?
Yeah. Look, there's time for politics. And, you know, it's time for politics. And it's an absurd insinuation. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty, away from the guilty, away from the guilty, 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 guilty. Design of planned attacks on buildings inside the U.S. and how operatives were directed to carry them out. That is valuable information for those of us who have the responsibility to protect the American people. He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. He gave us information that helped uncover Al-Qaeda cells' efforts to obtain biological weapons. We're developing tools within the Constitution to do so. Some people in this country want to get rid of them, and they're wrong. They're wrong. You can't expect me and people in this government to do what we need to do to protect you and your family if we don't have the tools that we think are necessary to do so.
And you said within the law, and yet you admitted that there were these CIA secret facilities. Okay.
So what? Why is that not within the law?
The head of Amnesty International says secret sites are against international law.
Well, we just disagree with him. And plus, my job is to protect you. And most American people, if I said that we had who we think's the mastermind of the 9/11, they would say, why don't you see if you can't get information out of him without torturing him, which is what we did.
Were you made personally?
My job is to protect this country, Matt, and I'm going to, within the law. And it gets second-guessed all the time by people who don't live in the United States. But let me remind you, September the 11th for them was a bad day. For us, it was a change of attitude.
These alternative methods you talked about in terms of extracting information from these suspected terrorists, were you made personally aware of all of the techniques that were used, for example, against the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and did you approve all of those techniques?
I told our people, get information without torture, and was assured by our Justice Department that we were not torturing.
It's been reported that with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, he was what they call waterboarded.
I'm not going to talk about techniques that we use on people. One reason why is because we don't want the enemy to adjust. The American people need to know we're using techniques within the law to protect them. You said to me, how can we be assured you're doing everything it takes to protect the American people? And I'm saying to you, we're listening to Al-Qaeda if they're calling in this country, and some people want to get rid of that program. We had walls that did not allow criminal investigators and intelligence forces to talk to each other. We've eliminated the laws. Let me finish. But one of the best source, according to those who are on the front lines of protecting the American people, is when we pick up somebody off of a battlefield, that we interrogate them within the law to get data. And I would strongly urge people to look at that speech I gave, because I declassified classified information to show how important the information we got from whom we think is the mastermind of the September the 11th attacks.
I don't want to let this within the law issue slip, though. I mean, if in fact there was waterboarding used with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and for the viewers, that's basically you strap someone to a board and you make them feel as if they're going to drown. You put them underwater. If that was legal and within the law, why couldn't you do it at Guantanamo? Why'd you have to go to a secret location around the world?
I'm not going to talk about techniques. And I'm not going to explain to the enemy what we're doing. All I'm telling you is that you've asked me whether or not we're doing things to protect the American people, and I want the American people to know we are doing so.
At some point, Mr. President, if techniques, these alternative techniques are used, I'm not going to ask you to specifically say about them, but if they are used, are you at all concerned that at some point, even if you get results, there's a blurring the lines of between ourselves and the people we're trying to protect us against?
Matt, I'm just telling you, what this government has done is to take steps necessary to protect you and your family. You asked me about your family, and you represent a lot of other people. Mm-hmm. And the best information we can get is from people we take off the battlefield, so we can act on it, so we can stop plots before they happen. And whatever we have done is legal. That's what I'm saying. It's in the law. We had lawyers look at it and say, Mr. President, this is lawful. That's all I can tell you. I'm not going to tell you specifically what's done, because I don't want the enemy to adjust. We're at war. This is people that want to come and kill your families. And the best way to protect you is to get information. And I'm confident the American people understand why we've done that. You see, we've acted on information they've given us to prevent attacks. And these are real. This isn't make-believe. These are attacks that were coming to hurt the American people again. And we got in a vehicle, and the kid driving the thing is felt like 100 miles an hour. I mean, we're bouncing along, charging along. Finally, I told the guy, I said, slow down. I mean, you know, Al-Qaeda's not here. Al-Qaeda's not here. Al-Qaeda's not here. That's about as humorous a moment as today. The decision was made to go to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. My question was, who did it? The head of the CIA, George Tenet, believed it was Al-Qaeda. It had the earmarks of an Al-Qaeda attack. But Tenet wasn't that definitive yet. So my first indication it could be Al-Qaeda was during the National Security meeting at Offutt Air Force Base.
My name's Tom Sullivan. I worked for Controlled Demolition Incorporated, CDI, the top-rated explosive demolition firm in the world, owned by the Loiseau family during the years surrounding 9/11. And I worked for them as an explosives loader for 2.5 years. As an explosives loader, my job was to place explosives in the buildings to prepare them for demolition.
More on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York behind me, down by the World Trade Centers, of just an area completely closed off as the rescue workers try to do their job. But this isn't the first building that has suffered as a result. We know that part of the Marriott Hotel next to the World Trade Center also collapsed as a result of this huge amount of falling debris from 110 floors of the two twin towers of the World Trade Center. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because this whole downtown area behind me has been completely sealed off and evacuated, apart from the emergency workers. That was done by the mayor, Rudy Giuliani, much earlier today because of, course, the dreadful collapse of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. But New York, very much a city still in chaos. The phones are not working properly, the subway lines are not working properly, and we know that down there near the World Trade Center there are 3 schools that are being turned into triage centers for emergency treatment. And I know that over in New York Harbor, where the famous Statue of Liberty is, there's a field hospital where 1,500 people are being treated, and we have heard, though it's unconfirmed as yet, that 100 New York City police officers have been taken there.